Welcome to Correlations, everyone, the Living Life with Astrology podcast. And I'm your host, Matthew Stelzner. I'm joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Jessica DiRuzza. I'm so happy to be here with you, Jessica, and we are living life with astrology, aren't we?
Oh my gosh, it's such a blessing to be here with you, Matthew. I'm so excited to join you today. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's going to be fun. It's a new decade. We're in the soaring, roaring 20s. And who knows what astrology will be like in the coming decade. But I'm excited to explore it with you. And we're recording here in a leap year on the extra day that we get. It's kind of amazing. We got an extra 24 hours in 2020. And this is it, the magic day. So I'm excited. And we're going to talk about the political situation in the United States. Right as we record, there's a primary taking place in South Carolina. And just 3 days from now, we have Super Tuesday. And it's an epic political season, I feel. Truly epic. And I want to discuss it with you, Jessica.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun, as you said, Matt.
So, where should we begin? I think I want to begin by just looking at the collective picture right now. We were looking at the chart for today, February 29th, 2020, and we've got this amazing, incredibly rare alignment, a Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto triple conjunction that's really been coming on strong in recent weeks, and it's all within 10 degrees now, which is an incredibly rare thing to have those three planets within 3 degrees of each other. We had it happen back in 1981, but before that it was 700 years. And we won't have it
Wow.
again for 1,000 years, these three planets this close together. And in this case, it's super strong all year. And it's going to get as close as 4 degrees. It stays within an 8 to 10 degree range from here till next January, but often it's in the 4 to 6 degree range at different points. So this is a very unique energy, and I think the practice that we do with astrology is how would I put it? We pray to the sky for understanding, for the
Mm.
of the uniqueness of the moment. And when you've got an incredibly unique, powerful alignment like a Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto triple conjunction, we would expect a very unique uh, quality to the time period. And I think we're seeing some really clear examples of this triple conjunction, which this whole month of March is joined by Mars, which is just getting to the 10-degree point. It's basically the next 5, 6 weeks that Mars is on board, and that brings an even more forceful version of it. Like, I think Mars just makes things so vivid. And so I think for this next 5, 6 weeks, there's going to be a vivid demonstration of this very rare alignment. And I think in our discussion, we're going to kind of tune into how it's coming through in the political situation and acknowledging that there's other things happening as well, that we're at the end of a 12-year Uranus Pluto square. And we also have Saturn coming into the square with Uranus. So Saturn is going across the Pluto Uranus square of the last 12 years. And so, having set that all out, I'd like to hear from you, your initial thoughts on all of this, if you want to tune into anything in particular, and then we'll just see where it goes.
I always appreciate how you bring in the specialness and therefore the sacredness of the moment. And as you were describing these cycles of time, I could really just feel how unique this moment really is. And that brings me to life. And when you were talking about Mars coming into the alignment and making everything more vivid, especially here for the month of March and into April, for me, it's like that quality of Mars bringing everything to life. It really has this springing forward energy as we in the northern hemisphere enter into the springtime. It's very action oriented. It's very much about being out in the world, and doing things. And so things that have been maybe dormant or latent or in gestation, when Mars comes around, it activates and catalyzes in such a manner that it really brings chi, it brings life force, the creative fire into whatever it touches. And I think that in this case, if we kind of just focus on for a moment the broad brushstroke of the Uranus square Pluto from 2008 or so to now 2020, I think what's so special about Saturn being on the Uranus square Pluto is that this is really how the decade began. This is really how the Uranus Pluto began, was with Saturn there. And this sets it apart for me in an important and distinct way from the 1960s when it was in conjunction. Because what Saturn does to the revolutionary spirit of Uranus that brings change and freedom, new beginnings, and has this very electric quality to it, of course, relating to technology and democracy. You see with Pluto, power and the transformative energies of death and rebirth, destruction and creation coming in. But with Saturn wants to make things real, and it wants to give it form and bring it into consensus reality. How do we bring things into consensus reality? Well, one way that we do that, at least here in the United States and in most parts of the world, is through law. We do that through law. We do that through government. We do that through our institutions, which reflect the underlying beliefs of our culture, which is pretty much based upon how we think we should treat one another as human beings on this planet. So what I love about this energy is that the revolutionary spirit and the transformative energies that have swept the world really strong over the last decade, it's time to implement those into our governments and our institutions. And I think that's what we're seeing on the political scene now, more than we ever have before. I mean, in a way, it does remind me a lot of FDR and the New Deal that he put forward. And I think that we're seeing this resurgence of things like the Green New Deal and universal healthcare, universal education, more of what's considered democratic socialism versus capitalistic socialism, which is what our society is mainly run on now, at least here in the United States. And what Saturn does for me is it brings maturation, but it does so by us having to look at the systems and the structures that are already in place in a very physical, real, tangible way, which we can see most clearly in things like the government and policies that we operate on. So I kind of just wanted to start there because this is what feels so pressing and alive right now, is the role that Saturn is playing with the Uranus-Pluto energy, and of course now Jupiter and Mars.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really spot on, Jessica. Yeah, it's very different from the 1960s in a few different ways, but we're in the next unfolding of the 60s with Uranus moving into the square. There's that sense of a kind of turning of the clock of what the Uranus-Pluto cycle represents. And it's like we've had all of this time living with the outgrowth of the 60s and all the responses of the 60s and all the people that were living in the 60s and how they've matured since then, and all the people that were born in the 60s and their maturational journey. And we've had a whole 12 years of this kind of new crossroads of integration. I think of the opening square as a crossroads of integration, where we've had enough time since the 1960s to really integrate the spirit and values of the 60s into the structures of our culture to a great degree. And yet, here as Saturn is coming onto the alignment at the end of the alignment versus at the beginning back in 2008 when it was in the T-square formulation, we can see, I think, just a next level of maturation. We've had this huge wave of the revolutionary quality of the Uranus square Pluto just saturating the collective for all these years. And now, as Saturn is sitting on it, there's a sense of both the challenge to the energy and the impulse to block it and frustrate it, but at the same time, a kind of really mature form of it coming in a deep way that's kind of profoundly restructuring the culture, at least potentially. I think we're seeing evidence of that in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, with the Saturn Pluto, you can see things like the transformation of structures taking place at a titanic level. I mean, we're talking globally at this point. What happens here in the United States of America, for better or worse, affects the rest of the planet. We are the most wealthy, most powerful country in the entire world. And you would hope that with that great power, Pluto would come a great responsibility, Saturn. Unfortunately, it hasn't always been the case. And there's a dark shadow of America being an empire and being a force of great oppression that happens in this country and happens around the world. And, you know, that's created a lot of enemies outside and inside. But I think that what we're seeing is a breaking down of the way that our government has worked. Mostly that's been working for the elite class. We could call that the 1%, or we could call that those that benefit from having a lot of wealth and power. And those are Jupiter Pluto themes. We see wealth and power, and then Saturn coming in, and it's saying, hey, are we going to take responsibility for this wealth and power? Because what's happening here is there's only a very, very, very small percentage of people on the entire planet that's benefiting from this wealth and power. And that means everybody else is suffering. And so it's that quality of Saturn Pluto that brings about the awareness of the dark underbelly of civilization and how power is being used and misused, but also the moral evolution that goes with that awakening. And Saturn relating to the government and institutions and the structures and systems, it relates to patriarchy. And here in America, it relates to patriarchy and white supremacy. And we see Pluto coming in and breaking that down. But there's this immense power struggle happening between you could call the right and the left, but I think actually what it's turning out to be, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is it actually is a much bigger story than that transcends the left and the right. It's actually about those at the very, 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 very top and the rest of the world. And I think what's happened over this last decade is the rest of the world has woken up, and we are moving into a globalized unit and saying, hey, we are the people, and this world needs to work for all of us, not just those who have all of the resources.
Yeah, I think there's this sense, as you're saying, that people are seeing through the control systems, the control matrix. There's a larger awareness than ever before. The awareness began to awaken profoundly in the 1960s. And it's evolved since then, and I think we talked about this earlier, the way in which the new social media technologies have transformed the capacity of the masses to get new perspectives, to have access to more progressive media than is allowed in the corporate media. These factors coming together, the power of mass scale technological advances to give access to information that was not available so readily before. And I think what we're seeing in something like YouTube in recent years, there's more and more of a potential for just ordinary people to set up a channel that can get a large audience. And then you get larger organizations that are more progressive, or individuals that are more progressive that can have very large followings and access to an alternate message, alternate narrative is the word I was looking for, an alternate narrative of what's happening. And I think we've been seeing this very strongly in recent weeks and months with the coverage of the political season, especially how we see the corporate media having a kind of meltdown around the success of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but especially as Bernie Sanders has come in to be the front runner, a very strong front runner, and I think we can even say presumed nominee by many people, presumptive nominee. I think that's how they say it. And we've seen in MSNBC in the last couple of weeks, people kind of melting down and freaking out, like Chris Matthews, comparing the situation to the invasion of France in World War II, and then having to subsequently apologize. I think that apology and acknowledgement of the bias is an indication of these old structures starting to break down in a way that is kind of in our face.
I feel like this definitely speaks very clearly to the Saturn coming in tighter and tighter to square Uranus. I mean, we're at just about 5 degrees now in this square, and Uranus, it's about democracy. It's about the democratization. It's about liberty. It's about freedom, and it's in the story of the planet. It's about giving the people access to consciousness, and that's why it rules astrology. That's why it rules science. That's why it rules technology, and like you're saying, with things like YouTube and social media, other narratives are being able to be told. And I was watching Noam Chomsky this week with Travis, and we were really talking about his book and his work around manufacturing consent. And, manufacturing consent very much relates to Saturn. And it can be that quality of Saturn. And it's like the news media that's owned by now 6 corporations completely controls for their own benefit the narrative that we all buy into, and that shapes our world, that shapes our belief systems, that shapes the things that we believe are and are not possible. And what Noam Chomsky was saying was that actually the corporations need the media to come across as liberal and radical, at least compared to the conservatives, because then that makes you not want to go beyond them, because if you did that, you would be an outlier and you'd be crazy and you would be silenced. But what we see happening now with things like YouTube and other people getting voices is people are starting to speak the truth outside of the binary system of the left and the right. And this is what Bernie Sanders represents. He represents a person with lifelong service and social activism and policy through his voting record that is outside of the binary of the left and the right. And the corporate media, and this includes MSNBC, doesn't know how to digest that. They can't comprehend because it doesn't fit within their paradigm. And yet the people are rising up, and with their vote and with their dollars. I mean, Bernie Sanders has raised the most money with the most donations. And it's shocking America because everyone's going, wait a second, this doesn't fit within the binary system that we were told for hundreds of years was the only way things could be done.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you look at Bernie Sanders' record, I mean, I was reviewing it today, and I mean, he was at the University of Chicago protesting segregation in university housing, doing sit-ins back in '62, and he was at the "I Have a Dream" speech on the ground, and he's been arrested. I mean, his record goes back to the '60s, a very consistent record of fighting for social justice, including pursuing. He registered as a conscientious objector in the '60s, so he was a really big part of the peace movement, and so he has that legacy, and he's carried it through all the way to the 2020s now. And this is the kind of political personality, as you say, that the mainstream corporate media has a very hard time with. And so, yeah, we're going to take a look at Bernie's chart and transits. But I think actually I want to start by I want to continue this conversation in the context of the collective alignments, but I want to bring in Elizabeth Warren and her recent performance in the Las Vegas primary debate. And this, for me, was, I think, maybe the most satisfying political moment of my life. And I feel like I'm an engaged citizen. I've been really engaged politically since I was able to vote in my first election in 1988. And, I wouldn't say I'm extremely political, but I try to do my best. And so I've been observing the situation since the 80s. And this moment with Elizabeth Warren, I feel, I think it was is the most satisfying moment of my political life, except for perhaps the election of Barack Obama, of course, incredibly satisfying moment. But I've never seen anything like this on a debate stage. And so I want to just show the clip here of, let's see where I put it. Oh yeah, here we go. Show this. And
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. Democrats are not going to win if we have a nominee who has a history of hiding his tax returns, of harassing women, and of supporting racist policies like redlining and stop and frisk. Look, I'll support whoever the Democratic nominee is, but understand this. Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another. This country has worked for the rich for a long time and left everyone else in the dirt. When the mayor says that he apologized, listen very closely to the apology. The language he used is about stop and frisk. It's about how it turned out. Now, this isn't about how it turned out. This is about what it was designed to do to begin with. It targeted communities of color. It targeted black and brown men from the beginning. And if you want to issue a real apology, then the apology has to start with the intent of the plan as it was put together and the willful ignorance day by day by day of admitting what was happening, even as people protested in your own street, shutting out the sounds of people telling you how your own policy was breaking their lives. You need a different apology.
Senator,
here,
thank you.
Bam! Dang, go Elizabeth Warren. That is awesome. What strength and courage.
Amazing, right? There's one other part here. I think I want to see if I can just find that, because this is even right.
Some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is
Let me
that?
finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like a joke I told. And let me point, there's agreements between two parties that wanted to keep it quiet, and that's up to them. They signed those agreements, and we'll live with it.
So wait, when you say it is up to, I just want to be clear. Some is how many? And when you say they signed them and they wanted them, if they wish now to speak out and tell their side of the story about what it is they allege, that's now okay with you? You're releasing them on television tonight?
Senator? No.
Is that
Senator, the company and somebody else, in this case, a man or a woman, or could be more than that, they decided when they made an agreement that they wanted to keep it quiet for everybody's interest. They signed the agreements, and that's what we're going to live with.
I'm sorry.
So in this debate, even Biden is going after Bloomberg's record.
Okay.
Wow.
What do you
Wow, she
think?
really went for it and didn't let him off the hook, held his feet to the fire.
It's powerful, right?
It's really powerful.
We're gonna take a look at her chart, but let me just switch this here back to the. So, yeah, I think there's a lot going on in these clips, and the whole debate, the sense of taking on the billionaire class. I think that's a big theme with Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn together, especially with Jupiter and Saturn. You can get the contrast between the rich and the poor, and those who are disadvantaged, the Saturn, and those who have the wealth and social advantages, which is more Jupiter, the royal caste, the higher caste, the elites can be part of what Jupiter represents. And so when you bring them together, it's like they're both in the room and they're having to be in a debate, be in a dialogue, learn from each other. And if you add Pluto to it, you get this deeper dimension of a kind of confrontation with the shadow of wealth and power, and Saturn bringing a kind of, how should we put it? I was thinking of the word condemnation, a kind of strong judgment of those in the elite class. And at the same time, it's so complex because with Saturn and Pluto, you can get this kind of consolidation of power, a consolidation of mass scale wealth and power. At the same time, you get the critical evaluation and the standing up to that wealth and power. And at the same time, we see a kind of a new crescendo of the Me Too movement happening in what Warren is doing here with Bloomberg, standing up to the sexual harassment and his patriarchal power moves. And I think that you have two billionaires on stage, and you got a billionaire in the White House, and you got the mass scale power of the corporate media, and you've got the mass scale power of the DNC, the Democratic elites who are controlling the party and trying to deny progressives their rights and their wins. And so, yeah, I think it's a profound moment in American history, this particular moment on that stage in Las Vegas.
I think part of what strikes me with the Saturn-Uranus is you see this energy of the establishment saying that what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren is doing is radical, right? They're carrying the narrative that what they're doing is extreme and crazy and impossible. And yet, if you really stop to think about it, what's so radical about everybody having health care? What's so radical about the wealthiest country in the world not being able to provide basic needs being met for the people that pay taxes, and those taxes go to fighting endless wars and pay corporate subsidies? Someone like Amazon that doesn't pay taxes and gets corporate subsidies, including the oil companies who are, of course, destroying the planet. Another version of Saturn Pluto, like the destruction of nature. It's just like the establishment, the old story is trying to say that's radical, when actually that is the most human kind, normal thing. Human beings have advanced in this world, especially in developed countries. to be able to provide basic human services to everyone because there's enough to go around. And the Saturn Pluto can have this quality of scarcity consciousness and extreme fear and extreme paranoia. And then the Uranus is there, and it's like it's judging the Uranus as and categorizing it as radical or impossible, when really the establishment is the minority, but they've tricked us to thinking that they're the majority, they're the right way, they hold the moral compass, and anything outside of that is actually insane.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is also it's kind of reminding me of how Jupiter Pluto has this quality of moral power and a kind of force of nature that can stand up to power and can stand up for moral causes, like we're seeing now in so many ways, kind of mass scale uprising, standing up for higher moral beliefs and for justice ultimately. And I've put up on the screen here a bi-wheel of Elizabeth Warren's chart in the middle and the chart for the night of the debate, the chart for that moment we've just been looking at. And you can see the debate started at 6 p.m. West Coast time, and the moon is just exactly on the Jupiter-Pluto-Saturn triple conjunction. And I think there's a sense of a kind of feminine empowerment that happens here, and a kind of powerful force of the feminine coming in and standing up to power, and standing up to those with wealth and power to deny others these basic rights that we're talking about here. And I think with Mars just coming in as that debate was happening, I think we start to feel the quality of this larger alignment coming in, and a sense of kind of titanic forces up against each other. The titanic force of the social justice movement up against the titanic forces of the global elite. And I think, and we can see that it's all coming on to Elizabeth Warren's Jupiter. But I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about the chart of that night, and maybe how it's lining up with Elizabeth Warren's natal chart. I mean, there's a lot that we could point out. The first thing I would point to in Elizabeth Warren's chart is this exact Mars-Mercury conjunction, which is really the alignment of political debate. But I think it also is just an inherently political alignment, where you basically have politicians are warriors for different perspectives, and warriors with words, warriors in their communication abilities. And I think we see a kind of brilliant, strong warrior with words there with Elizabeth Warren. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear anything else you want to share about it.
Yeah, I think that in combination with that exact Sun-Uranus conjunction, I mean, she's a freedom fighter. Obviously, she's identified as a liberal or as a progressive, but what she's talking about here is unshackling us, unchaining us from oppressive forces within the government, especially through policy. And so she's a liberator, and she's shining a light onto how democracy should work for the people, right? That part of Uranus that is carrying the torch, is carrying the light, the Statue of Liberty. But that day, Mars was opposite the Sun Uranus, and she's fearless. She already is a warrior with words, but that day she was channeling a fearless warrior energy. And she was so lit up. As you said, Mars makes everything more vivid. And I think, yeah, it brings it to life. And she was really alive that day. You know, some people said it's too bad that that debate couldn't have happened earlier, and that maybe she would have gotten more notoriety and more celebrated. But like, yeah, she was just seriously channeling this warrior energy. And I think too, what I like about her Mercury Mars is that it's trine Neptune. And so it's definitely in service, the warrior with the words and the strong voice, in service of the whole, in service of the collective, in service of healing. And what she's calling Bloomberg out on is she's saying, look, man, if you really want to be sorry, if you really want to make amends and have redemption here, then you need to be honest about the intention that went into what you did with stop and frisk. But you're unwilling to do that. And that right there is exactly what white supremacy is. And she's speaking to that, and it carries a spiritual tone to it in a way that, when MLK would speak, there was always a spiritual tone with his words, in that quality that social justice is spiritual practice. And I think she just nailed it. That
Yeah, she's totally kicking ass. The Mars opposite the Sun Uranus, that during that time period, it reminds me that when she first came into prominence here in the United States was during the economic crisis, in 2008 to 2010, and that's when she started to come into political power. And that was when Pluto was back here, Pluto opposing her Sun Uranus, and she's been kind of riding that transit ever since. I think Pluto Sun can be a transit like that, where there's a kind of force of nature that comes through and empowers a voice like Elizabeth Warren's, and then that voice is just sustained from that point forward. And so, yeah.
Well, let's say one last thing, and then maybe we want to transition into taking a look at Bernie as well. But I think that what you were talking about, like the empowerment of the feminine that day with the moon in there, with the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, there's like this emboldening, right? It's like she almost knows that she's not going to be the presidential candidate. It's very unlikely at this point. Yet she used that time and space of millions of people watching, and she used that as an opportunity to address a very real systemic issue with the elites and those in power. And she called them out on it. And she said, it doesn't matter to me whether or not I get elected. I mean, obviously she wants to, but it doesn't matter. I'm still going to do what's just and what's right in this moment. And that kind of emboldening that comes with that, I just think is such a noble quality to use one's platform and to use one's voice to get that type of message.
Yeah, I think it's also, this was the first time that Bloomberg basically was in any kind of dialogue with the people. He's only been putting on $500 million worth of advertising, just blanketing the media, including his own media corporation. He's not had to be in dialogue, and this is the first time he's standing on a debate stage. And thank goodness she got positioned right next to him, and it's like she was standing up for Gaia herself, I feel. And yeah, it's just, she's just my hero forever. I am just so grateful to her for that moment and for her continued service on behalf of all of us. There's one other thing I'm seeing here. There's a Mars trine Uranus in the sky that night, very exact, and it's forming a grand trine with her Saturn. She just seems so kind of stable, and just like the not just what she spoke, but the pacing of it. She just, there wasn't a moment that felt like it was overdone. It just felt just so strong and so clear. And I think the Saturn forming this grand trine by transit really kind of stabilizes and strengthens that warrior energy. And I think also the presence of Saturn in this larger alignment, the kind of strengthening quality that it brings, and the kind of gravitas of Saturn Pluto combined with the moon, a kind of deep, powerful, strong, feminine voice standing up to power. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Warren. So, yeah, maybe let's take a look at Bernie's chart and transits for a moment. Maybe should we take a quick peek at Bloomberg? I'll just mention. No, let's not go there.
Yay, good choice.
Let's not. We got his chart. We'll talk about it another time.
That guy doesn't need any more airtime. I mean, it just makes me want to puke. The amount of money that he has put into this campaign, and really all the money together that's gone into this political season, could go to feeding and housing and educating the people of this great country. And it's disgusting the amount of money that get put into politics every 4 years. And, in places like France, you get 3 months to campaign, you get a certain amount of money from the government, and that's it. And that's it. And I'm just,
yes.
Please give me a break. It's sickening.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what this fight is about. I mean, that is absolutely the system we should have. Everybody should have the same amount of money and the same amount of time. And yeah, 3 weeks, they go for it, and it's over. I love it. That would be so fair, I think is the word. That would be so fair. So let me put up Bernie's chart here.
And by the way, I am completely for ranked primaries.
Yes.
I am completely for making the election day a national holiday where everybody has it off. You automatically get registered to vote at 18. There's no such thing as having to then register. Get rid of party affiliation as it needs to vote in the primary, and abolish the caucus. So, these are very real things that I think are on the table that are going to help make this democracy actually be a democracy.
Wow. I would love it if you'd be in office, Jessica. I think you're saying all the right stuff there.
I think I've been to too many Burning Mans, and there's too many inappropriate photos and podcasts and things of me out there.
Okay.
Unless the world not that I'm doing anything, you know what I'm saying, but it's just until this culture isn't so patriarchal, they would definitely shame the shit out of me. 2 shakes of a lamb's tail.
Well, we've got time. The world is changing, and you've got a long life ahead of you, and we'll see what happens. That's what I think.
Okay. All right. I'm game.
So let's see. I think I've got Bernie up. Do you see Bernie?
Yes, there he is. Bernie, I'm gonna tell you today we're gonna take down the billionaires.
I just have to say, 4 years ago, when Bernie came on the scene, it is truly the first time that I've gotten really excited for a political candidate, and I supported him all the way until he wasn't in the race anymore, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if he'd be back for another. I didn't think he'd be back necessarily. And it certainly didn't look like he'd be the front runner just a couple months ago. And so it's an exciting political moment, definitely exciting for me. And I think this is going to be the most dramatic political year in our recent history. And Bernie, what do you see in Bernie's chart that might align with this unique moment that he represents?
Okay, there's definitely so many things, but this man is seriously after my own heart. He's born with a really tight Saturn-Uranus conjunction, just 2 degrees off there. And I as a Saturn-Uranus person, and the fact that we are now in a Saturn square Uranus, I just feel like there is such a deep resonance here, an opportunity for the energy of this moment, of this time, and what Bernie is representing. And what I love about Bernie is, of course, we're all familiar at this point with us, not me, us, not them. And he's really channeling the best parts of Sun Neptune. He's allowing himself to be a figurehead and, for there to be a certain amount of idolization. But what he's really saying is that great Sun Neptune pivot of using the projections and using the idolization and people putting their magic and their hope and faith into him, and him saying, it's not me. It's not me. It's us. Like, this has to be the people doing it, which is why all of his ads and campaigns are about other people's stories. It's not about him. He's not going to do anything. It's the people that are going to do things. And when people say, well, what do you think about Senate and Mitch McConnell running Senate, and how are you going to get things passed? And he's just like, look, when the people of Kentucky say they want their minimum wage raised to $15 an hour, the people have spoken. FDR turned to the people whenever he wanted to pass a bill, and he said, listen, this is what this bill is going to do for you. You're the ones that are going to make that happen. And Bernie is implementing the very same things that FDR was implementing. And I love that Saturn Uranus energy, because for me, what he's saying is he has worked his way up through being inside the system. And that's the genius of Saturn Uranus. It's a rebel at heart, but it's a rebel that plays the long game and that is super wise and judicious. He was true to himself the entire time. He always vote. He has a consistent voting record. As you said, protesting in the 60s, he was there. But like, he made his way up through the system as a senator. And that's the genius of Saturn Uranus. It brings innovation and change from the inside out. And it is so incredibly grassroots when it's at its best. And he has a grassroots campaign like none other. And he is bringing the people together like none other. And that is the genius of Saturn Uranus.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. It's this, it's a kind of sustained rebel, a revolution that's sustained and strong, and a rebel who's got that staying power, and that quality of trying to restructure the system and bring new freedoms from within the structure. I love that he's this revolutionary who also can deal with the more conservative structures and hang in there with it. It's don't you experience that the Saturn Uranus has this quality of a kind of tension of the opposites that has to be integrated, and when it is integrated, it gives a kind of revolutionary energy that's incredibly strong and wise and toughened from that.
It's sexy. How did this guy make it this far? I mean, as an independent, as somebody who is actually anti-establishment, how the hell did he make it through the establishment so far? He's about to take over the Democratic nomination of the United States of America. And this guy's policy is the opposite of the Republicans and moderate Democrats. I don't understand. He played decades of the game, yet he was always true and in integrity with himself. And that's the best part of Saturn Uranus. There's this sense of deep integrity and ethics, and you continue to be a revolutionary and you could continue to be a rebel. But do you know what he says? He constantly is like, I'm not a revolutionary. And that's the Saturn tempering the Uranian narrative that gets put on to us being radical, us being progressive. It's not progressive. It's not radical. It's basic. It's human. It's ordinary. It's actually fucking ordinary. And that's where you see the twist in the narrative. And you see this a lot with Saturn Uranus, this reversal. And he's like, I'm not a maverick, right? Like you would see someone that might have Saturn Uranus who would be like, oh yeah, I'm a maverick. I want to be a maverick. And he's like, I'm not a fucking maverick. I'm an ordinary, normal person. This is actually what normal behavior looks like, is to make sure everyone has education and healthcare, and we protect the planet that we live on. And I just love that jiu-jitsu move that he makes there with
that. I'm picturing Bernie in a jiu-jitsu, do they wear white and the black belt? I like that.
Oh, I bet his Venus Mars with his moon there would definitely be good at that, right? You see that a lot with martial arts.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up the Mars here. We don't have we don't know the birth time at all for Bernie. And so we cast the chart for midday, and that minimizes the error. But we know even if he's born at 12:01 a.m., that there'll still be a Moon-Mars conjunction within the orb, and very likely it's much tighter than it would be just after midnight. And so, yeah, I love he has the Moon-Mars, and it has so much to do with being an advocate, fighting for the people, fighting for those you care for, fighting for the ones that you want to be cared for by society. And yeah, you can clearly see that fight in him. And I think that's something that you see a lot in Moon Mars people. It's just a kind of no bullshit straight shooter. And that is how he talks about himself. He's like, I'm not going to play any games. I'm going to tell you exactly what I feel, and I'm going to tell it without any bullshit. And so that's I really love the Moon Mars combination. It's one of my favorites. I think. I mean, you can see it in my love for Elizabeth Warren because she was embodying the Moon Mars combination. I think it probably is one of the big alignments that has to do with social justice, and so yeah, in his case, it's opposite Venus as well. And how would you see the Venus coming into play there with the Mars in Bernie?
Well, one way you can see it in his campaign is the way that a lot of his ads are actually songs, or a lot of his benefits are pretty happening concerts. Like
right.
he isn't just filling up stadiums of thousands and tens of thousands of people when he speaks. He's also bringing people together for events, for happenings, for music, for dancing. And you've seen these incredible parties happening. And then you see all these musicians and rappers coming forward. I've seen incredible music videos made to support Bernie and to support the ideas that Bernie is representing. And, even though he talks like this all the time and people call him grumpy grandpa or whatever,
right.
There's people love him. And you see that a lot with Venus Mars. There's kind of this social charm or grace, and it's like it's atypical because he doesn't come across like like Hillary Clinton said, nobody likes him and everyone's like hashtag I like Bernie. It's like, yeah, he on the surface he doesn't seem like a typical person that is charming, but how the hell did he get so many millions of followers and donations if he didn't have some type of social grace and relationality? Yes. There's a kind of sexy charm that comes with Mars Venus.
Yeah, and I think you can see more of that quality in longer form interviews, and the sense that I get from people that have spent more time with him is that his heart does come through. There is a sweetness to the warrior energy that is very attractive. And I think also with the Moon Mars, the moon's kind of youthful energy perhaps comes into play there. A kind of
I like that.
Youthful warrior who also is fighting for the youth. And I think you also see that in Saturn Uranus, the kind of paradox where you have the youthful energy of Uranus, the new voice of the millennials, who somehow are identifying with this, what would be, I think, the oldest president ever in the White House. And yeah, how did this happen? That the youngest people in the country are attracted to the oldest candidate.
Yeah, there's that reversal again with Saturn Uranus, and that's that nature of it being so paradoxical, right?
Yes.
And it's just like identity politics has gotten to such a pitch. And what I love about the youth and millennials and minorities across the board uniting behind Bernie is that you see that it's not about him being a white older man. what it's about is the essence of what he stands for. And more importantly, it's not his beliefs, but his actions that have mattered. And that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a love of the warrior in him and the actions that he has taken every single day of his entire life. And now we're seeing this kind of ta-da moment of that all coming up and being put on display. I mean, I think this guy is in shock that he is in this position right now. I don't think he ever thought he'd be running for president of the United States. And something that Barack Obama and him have in common is they're both Sun Neptune figures. Though I feel that, and I feel like Obama really, and I have so much respect for the Obamas, whether or not you agree with their policies, the first African-American family in the White House and everything that they did. I mean, I read Becoming by Michelle Obama. It's a great book. I highly recommend reading it. Anyways, I think that they both tried to wield their Sun Neptune, again, that kind of hero worship and the projection of the idol or the savior that you can see that happens with Sun Neptune people. And they tried to turn it around and say, it's not me, it's us. And I think Bernie is a continuation of that, but in like a very like cut through all the bullshit. This guy, probably because he's a white man, actually can say things in a certain tenor and tone that Obama could have never said, because he would have been categorized as the angry black man. And that's why he always said, they go low, we go high. They go low, we go high. And they started a production company called Higher Ground. Check it out, American Factory. You should definitely watch it. But anyways, Bernie actually can get angry or sound angry because he is a white man. Yet he isn't he isn't being the white man in the stereotypical sense. And that's another reversal that we see with the Saturn-Uranus, that he's not an elitist. He's not a white supremacist, right? He's not out for personal gain, but by mouthing ideological things that would make the Democrats happy. He actually, in my opinion, is the truest Democrat that I've ever seen. And that would be a democratic socialist. That is exactly what it truly means to be a Democrat.
Wow, there's so much there that I would like to explore more with you. I love what you're saying about his Sun Neptune, and how he's reversing some of the usual ways that can play out, where he is a visionary, but he's also encouraging all of us to be visionaries and to hold on to our vision together and not just project that visionary capacity onto him or other politicians. And yeah,
I think in part there's different reasons for that. I mean, the Neptune's trine Saturn, but it's also in Virgo, and he has Sun, the North Node, and Neptune all in Virgo, an Earth sign, which it tends to ground things. It tends to make things more practical. It tends to make it of the earth. And as someone, I have Sun, Mercury, Neptune, and Capricorn, and like I find myself doing the same thing. It's like whatever vision I have, whatever kind of spiritual practice I have, I hope what is at the heart of it is to empower everyone to be a visionary, for everyone to be a healer in their own right. And it's like, whatever you see in me, let me help see in you. And I think that's what Bernie Sanders is doing. He's like, what you see in me isn't me. What you see in me is us. And there's no other time on this planet that we need that, not just that message, but then the policy action that he is taking and what he's putting forward to actually embody that, which is different than the moderate Democrats. They can say all day long that they're Christian and that they believe in rights for the people, but when it comes to what they're actually willing to do with their policies, I don't see that happening anywhere close to where it needs to be happening, like I see in Bernie and in Warren to a somewhat minorly lesser extent.
Yeah, wow. We've only got a couple minutes left here, and we haven't even looked at Bernie's transits or a lot of other charts we could look at, other people's transits. But I'll just point out that this Jupiter-Saturn-Pluto alignment is squaring his Mars, amongst other transits that he has. Also, Neptune has been opposite his Sun and is basically going across the Sun, Neptune, Jupiter He's got Jupiter square the sun, Neptune. So Neptune's just really lighting up that visionary potential in his chart. And also, I think, perhaps kind of tapping him into a level of inspiration and even spiritual support that I would think he's got to have to be able to handle what's happening right now. But I think you can really see this kind of strengthened, empowered, expanded warrior energy with all those squares to his Mars. And of course, it's also all square his Venus. And here, this next few weeks, Mars is in there. It's all on his Mars. So, I mean, epic. We got an epic fight happening here. And I mean, wow, what a moment in history we're living in, Jessica, don't you think?
Absolutely. It reminds me of something that I saw in the Mr. Rogers movie, and that is the newest one with Tom Hanks. And at one point, the journalist who's writing the article is based on a true story, writing an article on Mr. Rogers, and he's talking to Mrs. Rogers, and he said, "This guy's a saint." And she said, "Please don't call him." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because that means that how he is unattainable."
Oh,
And
wow.
that's the exact opposite of what it is that he's trying to do here. And
Wow.
that's how I feel about Bernie Sanders and the movement that is Bernie Sanders, which is the movement of us.
Wow. I just got chills hearing that. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm really looking forward to it. Maybe we should do a future podcast on Mr. Rogers.
I would love it. Let's make a date of it.
Oh, I like that. Future to balance out all this politics. I think maybe we need to talk about Mr. Rogers. Wow. Well, it's been such a pleasure to be with you here today, Jessica. I'd love for you to share anything you want about the work you're doing. I mean, it's been a while since we've been together, and you've just been up to so much. You've got a new podcast happening. You've got a Facebook community that's been growing. What would you like to say?
Oh, I just want to say how much I love you and how thankful I am that we got to do this today. These sacred conversations that you and I have are so dear to my heart. You're one of my favorite people on the planet to talk with. And it's the privilege of a lifetime to be here with you and to be your colleague and friend. And
Thank you.
mean, in a nutshell, I'm doing my full-time psychotherapy practice, which I'm loving, and also doing a handful of readings every week going along with that. But the kind of newest things that have been happening through Trust Psyche is we now have over 100 students and celebrating all the awesome online astrology courses at trustpsyche.com, which you can begin right now at any time. And it teaches you how to do what we do here on correlations, natal chart, personal transits, world transits, going into the planetary combinations. And also, as Matthew mentioned, I have a new podcast. It's called Stream the Trust Psyche Podcast. And you can find that either on the Trust Psyche YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast app. There's about 15 episodes so far, and I'm really enjoying doing those. And I'd love to have you on very soon, Matthew.
I would love to.
Everybody, here I am. Here you are. Let's kick some motherfucking ass.
This has been so awesome. I'm really going to try to get you to run for office, Jessica. We're going to find some way where there's some place where you can run without anybody giving you any shit. We're going to figure that out. And what else do I want to say? You can find my work through my website, MatthewStelzner.com or stelz.biz. We're going to try to get this out to larger podcast platforms starting hopefully with this episode, but for the YouTube version, we'll have all kinds of links below for Jessica's work and my work. I'm doing intuitive readings, and I would love to work with you if you feel drawn to that. And yeah, Jessica's class, I've been in one of her classes, the Deepening Your Astrological Practice class.
Yes.
Kicked ass, so amazing. Definitely should check it out. And I taught a class last year called Tarot and Flow, and that will be available at some point here. And so I look forward to being with you again, Jessica. And thank you so much to our Correlations audience for following us. This has been 9 years we've been doing this. One of
Woo!
the original astrology podcasts on the internet. I'm pretty sure.
OG, we're the OG Kush, baby.
I'm pretty sure there was maybe one or two back when we started this out. But we led the charge, and we're going to keep leading the charge into the future. And blessings to everyone, sending so much love. Until next time, this has been Correlations, the Living Life with Astrology podcast.
Thank you.